Hi, my name is Mary Black, and I'm going to be talking to you about the contamination of North Carolina waterways by PFAs. In June 2017, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services was notified of a chemical called Genex found in drinking water sourced from the lower Cape Fear River. But what are PFAs exactly? Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances are a group of man-made chemicals that include PFOA, PFOS, Genex, and an estimated 5,000 other chemicals. You may have heard of these in the 2019 film Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo. Genex replaced a group of voluntarily phased-out compounds known as PFOA and C8. Although PFOA and PFOS are no longer manufactured in the United States, they are still produced internationally and can be imported into the United States in common products such as stain-resistant carpet, leather and waterproof apparel, textiles, paper and food packaging, non-stick pan coating, rubber, and plastics. We come into contact with PFAs through the things we buy, but according to the EPA, most drinking water contamination results from living near facilities that handle PFAs, like manufacturing plants or wastewater treatment facilities. In 1946, DuPont invented PFA chemicals patented as Teflon, and 3M became the main manufacturer. Today, the family of compounds, including Teflon, is found not only in pots and pans, but also in the blood of people and animals around the world, including 99% of Americans. It is here that PFAs have the ability to build up and persist over time. PFA chemicals pollute air, water, soil, and they do not break down. They have incredibly long half-lives and remain in the environment and people for decades. Many scientists refer to them as forever chemicals. There is evidence that exposure to PFAs can lead to adverse health outcomes in humans. The most studied PFA chemicals are PFOAs and PFOS. Study indicates that these chemicals cause reproductive and developmental, liver and kidney, and immunological effects in laboratory animals. Both chemicals have cause tumors in animals. The most consistent findings are increased cholesterol levels among the exposed population, with more limited findings related to low infant birth rates, effects on the immune system, cancer, and thyroid hormone disruption. While touting Genex as being a safe replacement for PFOA, DuPont filed 16 reports that revealed Genex caused cancerous tumors in lab animals. A 2019 Auburn University study found that short chains like Genex may pose even worse risks than long chains like PFOAs, which supports scientists' growing agreement that the entire class of PFAs are a hazard. So in 2017, when investigators found PFA in NC waters, the question became, how did a known toxic chemical have such high concentrations in the Cape Fear River? We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but first let's talk about the Cape Fear River and its stakeholders. The Cape Fear River is one of 4 river basins completely contained within North Carolina's boundaries. The Cape Fear is the largest river in North Carolina, encompassing a 9,000 square mile basin that includes streams flowing from 29 of 100 counties and about 27% of the state's population, along with a dozen municipalities situated within its boundaries. The contamination of NC waterways are still in threat, even as research suggests Genex levels are dropping. In fact, a study released by the Working Group in January 2020 found that a part of the Cape Fear River in eastern North Carolina had the highest rate of PFA contamination of 44 water samples taken from across the nation. Let's talk more about the complex background of Genex in NC waters. In 1971, commercial production begins in the Fayetteville Works plant in Fayetteville, North Carolina, built by the chemical company DuPont and its spin-off Chemours. In 1980, based on the public disclosures by plant officials, DuPont has been discharging Genex as a byproduct of its manufacturing processes since at least this year. In 2006, the North Carolina Division of Water Quality, in consultation with the Department of Health and Human Services, established a temporary limit on PFOA to 2,000 parts per trillion. In 2009, DuPont informs the EPA that it will be making Genex commercially at its Fayetteville Works plant along the Cape Fear River as a replacement for PFOA. Up to this point, the company says Genex was a manufacturing byproduct of a different chemical manufacturing process. In 2010, DuPont environmental managers met with NC Department of Environmental Quality to discuss a compound that would replace PFOA by 2015. A state regulator's handwritten notes of the meeting call the material Gen X and add that the company will dispose of the new material off-site by incinerator. In 2012, the North Carolina DEQ approves DuPont's wastewater discharge permit, effective from March 1st, 2012 to October 31st, 2016. Later this year, the NC Science Advisory Board unanimously agreed to set a maximum state limit for PFOA at 1,000 parts per trillion for groundwater. In June 2015, a DuPont representative meets with DEQ regulators to discuss a forthcoming EPA study that identifies a new PFA compound in the Cape Fear, Gen X. They went on record saying that they were no longer discharging the chemical into the water. The next month, Chemours split from DuPont, and it was approved for a permit that allows wastewater discharge into the Cape Fear. This year, the EPA also issued a lifetime health advisory establishing a health protective drinking water threshold of 70 parts per trillion for PFA. In 2016, in late April, Chemours requested renewal of its wastewater discharge permits. The wastewater permit expired, but is allowed to administratively continue until the state could rule on the current renewal application per the normal permitting process. A few days later, an NC State professor with co-authors from UNC Charlotte and several governmental agencies published a paper showing elevated levels of Gen X in some sampling near a drinking water treatment plant along the Cape Fear River near Wilmington. He notes, levels of Gen X were very high in the Wilmington, North Carolina area, and that none of the newly discovered compounds discharged by the Chemours plant was being removed by the city's Sweeting treatment plant. Additionally, the study showed that removing Gen X from drinking water also showed to present a greater drinking water challenge than the older industrial compounds it was meant to replace because it's harder to remove from water. Now that we have a better understanding of the issue, let's talk about some of the regulations important to it. As I have mentioned, presently Gen X is an unregulated chemical. However, as a result of the PFA Focus Engagement community events, the goals set at the 2018 Leadership Summit on PFAs, and approximately 120,000 public comments received by the agency, EPA developed the PFA Action Plan, which was issued in February 2019. As a part of EPA's efforts under the PFA action plans, the agency is following through on the commitment to address PFAs in drinking water. The agency's work over the past year included efforts to expand drinking water test methods, to work under the Safe Drinking Water Act, to make regulatory determination to PFOAs and PFOS, to determine new toxicity assessment, and continue monitoring for PFOAs. The EPA, along with state, federal, local, and tribal partners, is working to develop reliable, consistent laboratory methods for detecting and identifying PFAs in drinking water. In December 2019, the EPA announced a new validated method for testing additional PFAs in drinking water, the EPA Method 533. The new validated test method complements other actions the agency has taken under the action plan to help communities address PFAs nationwide. This scientific advance makes it possible for both government and private laboratories to effectively measure more PFAs, chemicals, in drinking waters than was possible before. Under the PFA Action Plan, the EPA is working to determine if there is enough available data and research to support the development of Clean Water Act water quality criteria for PFAs. The EPA develops criteria for determining when water has become unsafe for people and wildlife using the latest scientific knowledge. These criteria are recommendations, and state and tribal governments may choose to adopt these criteria or use them as a guidance in delivering their own water quality criteria. The EPA is also actively collaborating with the Department of Defense to determine benchmarks to protect aquatic life and the aquatic-dependent wildlife. In addition, the EPA is developing a risk assessment to better understand the potential public health and ecological risk associated with PFAs and land-applied biosolids. In December 2019, the EPA met its own deadline to issue interim recommendations for addressing groundwater contamination from PFOA and PFOS under federal cleanup programs, a priority action under the PFA Actions Plan. The interim recommendations provide clear and consistent guidance for federal cleanup programs and help protect drinking water resources in communities across the country. With these interim recommendations, the EPA is prioritizing public health impacts by focusing on addressing groundwater that is a current potential source of drinking water. The guidance recommends using screening level of 40 parts per trillion to determine if a PFOA and or PFOS is present at a site and may warrant further contention. Screening levels are risk-based values, and they are used to determine if levels of contamination may warrant further investigation at a site. Using EPA's PFOA and PFOS lifetime drinking water advisory level of 70 ppt at the preliminary recommendation goal. Using EPA's PFOA and PFOS lifetime drinking water health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion as a preliminary recommendation goal for contaminated groundwater that is a current or potential source of drinking. Preliminary remediation goals are generally initial targets for cleanups, which may be adjusted on site-specific basis as more information becomes available. Resolutions. Following more extensive research into the impact on environment, human health, and other species from specifically Gen X, this chemical compound will likely become better regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, commensurate with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act.